Hey guys, welcome to the Rengen Roundtable. Thanks for joining us today. We're really looking forward to our chat here at Rengen House. So joining us today is Jonny Hyndman, who's from Boodle Hatfield, Iestyn Lewis, who's the CEO of Rengen, Peter James, Managing Director of Rengen, and then we have George Cardale, who is from Savills, and then we have Craig Silver, who is from Close Brothers. Welcome, guys.
Well, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I guess let's start off with, we're sort of all heading down to MIPIM, really, which is the reason for this chat. It's a big property conference, for those of you who don't know what it is. It's about 80 different countries from around the world with about 30,000 people, and it's the largest property conference in the world. So we will be heading there in a couple weeks, and we'll get into that chat in a little bit. But I'd like to talk about first with our guests, sort of who they are and their relationship with Rengen and how we work together, and some of their thoughts on the current market. So let's start with Jonny.
So yeah, I think the first development we did with the Rengen team was back in 2012, 2013, Whitcomb Social Club.
Remember it well, Jonny.
Brings back some fond memories.
It does, yeah. Developing next to a canal and a canal pond. Not exactly the easiest construction in the world, actually. I think we had to build a dam before we built the construction, actually.
and dealing with a committee sitting on the other side.
A committee on the other side.
Which always makes it easy.
Yeah, yeah, a bit like herding cats, really, yeah.
So yeah, that's a few years ago now, and then yeah, we had a good meeting down in MIPIM sort of the year after, and the relationship was just developed really from there.
Yeah, I mean, how many projects do you think you've done, Jonny? I mean, we've done a lot in that 10-year period,
Yeah,
but I haven't really counted. It's got to be 30 projects?
Maybe more, maybe
Yeah.
like 40?
It probably is. But the interesting thing Jonny said there was the meeting down in MIPIM, where basically we decided to try and focus all of that legal input, you know, in at specific people, if you like, just to get some consistency in what we were doing as a business, which I think has served us well over the years.
Yeah, I think it was on the basis that I think we were trying to sell a portfolio, which we ended up actually doing down in MIPIM. I can't remember whether it was that year or not, but we did actually sell one of our portfolios to Places for People doing the MIPIM trip. So I think the intention behind the sort of Jonny scenario was we have everything in the same place at the same time, and it makes the disposal a lot easier. So on that basis, Jonny, I think, you know, over a few beers, let's say, you picked up a decent relationship.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
actually
excellent,
quite a big lump of work come off the back of that, actually.
Yes, keeps me out
I
of
think
trouble.
consistency is a good point that you make, Peter, because you know, having Jonny in the background for the deals, especially when it comes to dealing with our solicitor, it certainly helps the familiarity of dealing with the same people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a vital component of it. Otherwise, it's almost like you're re-educating people all the time, which, you know, adds to costs and adds to time frames. So, you know, when you've got lawyers dealing with each other who are used to dealing with each other, it just makes the process a whole lot easier.
Absolutely.
I think the thing to add to that, so quick, briefly, George, the thing to add to that, Pete, our projects never tend to be straightforward.
No,
as I've said, Whitcomb Social Club, we actually had to build a dam before we built the building next to the canal, and one of the deepest locks in the UK. So I think understanding the way we work, the sort of projects we do, which tend to be brownfield inner city sites with some kind of complexity, no, is not vanilla. I can't think of many of our sites that are particularly straightforward.
No. We like challenges.
That's true, yeah.
You mentioned the Place for People deal that you agreed at MIPIM, and that was, I think, some of the best agency and MIPIM example I've seen, because there's a very dear man called Simon Hartnell,
Yes,
who sadly is
there
no
was.
longer with us.
Yeah.
But he had a coffee with someone from Place for People in the morning,
that's right.
then he had lunch with Iestyn, and Iestyn said, the guy from Place for People said, I want to buy a portfolio. Iestyn said, I want to sell one. He put the two together, picked up a multi-100,000 fee for the trouble, and by his own admission was the best deal he's ever done.
Yeah.
Although of course they don't happen very often, but it's nice when they do happen, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer person.
No, I couldn't.
I think the lunch was a pretty good lunch as well, as I remember. Although the memory is a little bit faded.
I think it was
Given the way the
I think it was the
afternoon
Thursday lunch, Pete, wasn't it? Towards the end of the few days down. I think we were both rather jaded going to that lunch, actually.
Yeah.
So, Craig, let's introduce you for a bit. So talk to me about your relationship with Rengen and how long you've known them and what you do.
Okay, I'm trying to think back to the first deal now. It's probably Braggs Lane back in 2016. Is that be about right?
Yeah, it probably was actually. Either that or Sea Cadets, was it?
Yeah, I think that followed on. Close Brothers is essentially specialises in the provision of short-term structured finance for speculative residential development. But also we take in student accommodation, obviously, which is the speciality here. But the deals that we've done over the years, probably 7 or 8 now, I would have thought, if not more. Obviously, the Paintworks one is a very big one, which has taken a few years, but is I think the most important thing with Iestyn and his team is the ability to value engineer a project to get the most out of it, whereas other developers may have looked at it and seen it as unviable. And I think that is quite a unique characteristic that I've seen over the years that I've been lending. And I think it's also very good that they have the backing of the IESIS team and the speciality support from the professionals, because that clearly puts them in a unique position when it comes to delivering the various projects. So we're very happy with the operation and the leadership, if I can say that.
Sounds good.
So it's always nice to know, but I suppose, not meaning to reciprocate, but from our perspective, it's also good to have a consistent lender that sits behind some of the stuff which we do, and we're hugely appreciative of the way that you look after us as a business, Craig, in terms of, we know what we're going to get when we come and talk to you, and your knowledge of the industry is unquestionable, and it helps us as well. So it's
that's good to know. I think from years of experience in it, but our business is all about relationships, and coming back to MIPIM, obviously, relationships. We all do. There's lots of solicitors that are fishing in our pond. There's lots of agents. There's lots of lenders, but it's the people and the personalities that I think, obviously performance as well, but the people and the personalities are what forges the relationships. And as long as you remain competitive and do perform, as I say, it's something which, relationships last for years in our business.
Most of our sites are complicated one format or another, whether it's in our existing listed building or whether there's some complicated ground conditions. There does tend to be some level of complication. I think where we win with Close Brothers, as Peter's already touched on, Craig's knowledge of the industry is second to none, really, the lending market. And it's really important for us to have that confidence in the delivery process, which is where we do make a lot of these projects work, actually. It's the engineering, typically. It's, that's our specialism as far as IESIS is concerned, although we obviously have PM, QS, CA, and a number of other different trades in there. But it's normally the ground conditions or the complexity in the site is where you solve the problem, and that's where you make the saving. Trying to explain that to somebody who doesn't understand the industry is extremely difficult, and it's those sorts of relationships, particularly the one with Craig, where, okay, it is a difficult site, it might take a little bit of time to solve the problem, but we will solve it, we will get there, and we'll hit the date. And I think consistently with our sort of borrowing from Craig, we've demonstrated that, which obviously then leads to larger projects like Paintworks and more volume. And I don't recall how much debt we've taken from Close Brothers over the years actually, Craig, but it's got to be, I'm sure you will tell me.
I would say it's probably nearing the 50 mark.
50 million, and I think we paid back.
You paid it back, which is the most important thing.
I was just going to say, I think we paid it back. Yeah.
The shoebox has been replenished.
Yeah, and gone again, I think. So, it is that. It's very, it's very difficult to explain to somebody some elements of development finance and development delivery if they don't fundamentally understand that part of the process. Some lenders specialise in long-term debt. Some in sort of refurbishments. We do a very mixed bag of delivery, and we don't necessarily know what we're going to deliver, but we've got the skill sets to deliver most things. But what you do need is a lender that understands, there are going to be complications, but actually going to leave you alone to go and solve those complications, which is what we get. And that trust is paramount in what we do on a day-to-day basis at Rengen, particularly given the bandwidth of projects we've got on. We can't get bogged down in early level paperwork trying to explain something. We just need to be trusted to press on with the process.
There's another layer to this as well, yes, which is, if I think back over the period of our involvement with Craig and Close Brothers, other than stating the obvious, which the interest rate will have moved as the market has moved generally, the terms on which we borrowed from Close Brothers throughout that entire period have not varied. No. So for us, when we're looking at the viability of a project, we know where we're going with it. We know what the parameters are, whether it's fundable and whether it's worth pursuing it to its conclusion. And that is, it's an intrinsic component of what we're doing, knowing that what we can do, we can fund, and the level at which we can fund it is vital.
Absolutely. I think it's important as well to stress about the appetite of the lender and the capital available to lend. If you don't have the money to lend, it means you're in and out of the market. Whereas Close Brothers has just been consistent all the way through, especially through the recessions, and hopefully, I'm sure will be the same through the next period, although one doesn't know precisely what the outcome is going to be at this time.
And what do you think the difference is between the recession of 2008 and what we are coming into?
This will be probably my 5th recession I've worked through, if you include COVID, which was a very special circumstance. But every recession has different characteristics. The 2008 recession was created really by a liquidity crisis following the subprime debt collapse. At that point, the banks were wiped out from their capital, and a lot of our competition, which at the time was the Scottish, Irish and Icelandic banks, just disappeared. And we were left in a strong position because they had taken so much business in the lead up to that crash. But I think the circumstances now are that much different insofar as the financial state of the banks is in a far better position. Their capital's more intact. They have not had silly lending practices like 105% mortgages, etc. They're been protected by the Mortgage Market Review, which was a Bank of England imposing certain restrictions or criteria regarding how they provide mortgages and calculate the multipliers for people, stress testing for availability of mortgages, and also Help to Buy. Help to Buy was very successful for what is probably the riskier end of the market, being the first-time buyer end, which effectively they were lending, instead of at what would have been 90-95% normally, they were lending at 75%. So the government took the risk. So I think in comparing 2008 with now, I think the banks should be in a lot better position to see themselves through. But there will be some mistakes, because there always are. So I'm sure that there'll be some very bad situations for them to have to deal with. But again, it depends on how long the recession takes to get through the bad times and get us through the other end. That's the untold, unpredictable side of it. Undoubtedly, the confidence is low at the moment because everyone's expecting a sustained economic slump.
No, but it's a very strange environment though, Craig. At the moment you've got stock market going ballistic, you've got employment and unemployment, unemployment at historically low levels, no jobs available in the market. It's some of the components that you've seen in previous recessions are not prevalent at the moment. It's really strange.
I agree. I think also we've just come out of the COVID recession, albeit it was a very specialist, V-shaped graph or whatever jump back out. But I think what that taught people was to live in, as it were, recessionary circumstances, so they're more prepared for it now.
That's probably true. Yeah.
So George, just talking about this sort of topic as an estate agent, and you can also introduce what you do as well. How do you see things in the residential development and residential sales market currently?
Thank you. So I'm George Cardale and I'm head of Savills Residential Development Sales for the UK. So as the business that I run, we sell about 4,500 properties, new build properties each year for developers, and we act for some of the PLCs and a lot of the SMEs. And we come across our friends at Close quite a lot on the other side, lending there, and we've sold various projects for Rengen over the years. In fact, two of your largest open market schemes, which is Bragg Lane and Paintworks, which we've sold and had a good relationship, and also act as a bit of a sort of signpost for Rengen within Savills, so we can help introduce them to other parts of our business that may be commercial or, as advertised recently, moving into London. But to answer your question, residential development market is in a fairly interesting state right now. Q4 was pretty poor in the market generally, but this year started a lot better. So if we looked at our February sales, we were down 15% on our 5-year average, and we're pretty happy with that. Could have been a lot worse. We're not out of the woods yet, it's too early to call it. So the Savills view is that we'll see a 10% price drop. That's the mainstream market. So that's across all markets. And of course, we're talking about specifically the new build market here. And that reacts differently than the second-hand market. So we live in a small island and lots of people want to rent or buy a house to live in. So supply is low, which Craig mentioned earlier, for the reasons about build cost inflation and confidence, and therefore if demand is strong and supply is short, it generally means it won't be as affected as other markets. Also, the result of the energy bills, which are extreme, aren't they? So people's household bills used to be 30 or 40 quid a month, and now they're sort of £300 a month. And it seems ridiculous how much they could have gone up by. And when somebody's bill was 30 or 40, they didn't really mind if they were losing some efficiency, but if it's 300, they will. So, of course, the advantage of buying new is that it will be much more efficient. So the Savills view is that it's 55% more efficient for a standard 3-bedroom house, which equates to about £3,000 a year. So that's your 300 quid a month. So that is making a difference, and we're seeing more buyers attracted by that. 98% of all new builds are either EPC rated A or B, and if anything is rated A, which only about 2% of the market is, then it's very attractive because people's utility costs will be much lower than otherwise.
Right, and how do you see, so now that we're getting rid of Help to Buy, how do you think that's going to affect sort of first-time homeowners or buyers down the market, not only from an agency perspective, but also from a developer's perspective?
So there's other products in the marketplace which offer a similar service, and banks used to lend at 95% to first-time buyers. I've never really understood why they should discriminate against the first-time buyer against the second-time buyer, because I don't know if they looked at the equity,
the increase in value, I suppose, and therefore the equity margin should have been higher.
I think it's deeply unfair, Craig, and I want you to change it. So, and also banking mum and dad is very common. However, of course, not everyone is lucky enough to have a wealthy parent who will be able to help them out. So it is a concern. However, there are other products in the marketplace, and banks will just need to lend at higher loan to values to make up for that.
That's an interesting one as well, because Craig touched upon how useful Help to Buy has been over the last couple of years, and with it now disappearing, there is a bit of a void there which needs to be filled.
So as I say, there's products in the marketplace where if you're a first-time buyer, through Gallagher RE, you can buy with a 5% deposit. There's slightly different terms to what Help to Buy would have been, which is a government loan. But there is still a policy through the House Builders Federation. There's a product out there.
So coming on to your point there, George, about 15% drop. So 10%, if we 10%, sorry,
Don't talk them off down.
Over-egg that, George. Sorry, George, 10%. So I mean, if you look at that and then you say, okay, looking at where we're building that sort of product, if we're looking at the first-time buyer product, if you like, what does that cost to build, and what is it costing us at the minute to build? You've got a very, very sort of small margin in between those two as far as build inflation and sale deflation, if you like. Are we going to see much being built in that sector on that basis? Because what our experience, or my experience of recessions as far as land ownership is concerned, people don't believe they need to move the land value. So are we going to see much product being built in that sector, even though there is significant requirement for that product? How are we going to get that delivered?
And that's exactly why I say that new builds are unlikely to be affected as much as the mainstream market, which there's much more supply for that very reason. If a developer is facing the prospect of their values dropping by 10% and the build cost rising by 20%, and they normally make a 20% margin, then the maths don't add up.
No, well, nonetheless, one of the other components moves, like the land. But our experience is land doesn't move that quickly. It may do over time. It certainly won't do on a short-term basis. If a landowner thinks their land is worth £4 million, it takes a lot to move that £4 million, and that certainly doesn't happen on a short-term basis.
It depends on the position of the landowner at the end of the day, because you can have a family of farmers, for instance, that have got a green field that's been in the family for years, and if they're not getting the right price for it, they can just sit on it for a long time.
Absolutely.
They put it, but you might have another landowner who has optioned a piece of land, has managed to obtain a ticket against that, and then doesn't have the money or the wherewithal to actually fund the purchase. So therefore, they may be in a stickier position. You might have someone who actually owns the land and has got a level of gearing in it, which is costing them money, and therefore they need to exit quickly. But you're right, landowners over the years have wanted to participate or enjoy some of the development profits without taking a risk. But now the game is changing because you can't rely on house price inflation at this present time, and even moving into I think Savills, the forecast is 10% for this year, but it's only moving up, and this is national averages as well, but it's only moving up probably 1.5%, something like that, in 2024, I think was the forecast.
2.5,
which is
3, but yeah.
So it's we're talking about a flat market, which is therefore important for developers to maintain their costs as tight as possible, which isn't easy given the supply chain issues and the cost of materials.
And are we seeing on that basis, developers having to take a bit of a long-term view on that, which actually changes the product and say, okay, look, I can't make the margin I need to on a short-term sale basis, so I'm going to need to take a long-term view. I mean, are you seeing that, George, within Savills generally, more build-to-rent type product, more co-living type product, moving more towards a rental sector on a 20-year basis rather than crystallising your profits on an 18-month basis, say?
So you're asking a
sales agent
who makes his money out of selling open market product.
Bit of a loaded question there, George.
And therefore, of course, PRS and build to rent are very admirable use classes, and it works in many times. Often, not all the time, but often you won't get to the open market values.
No, traditionally that's what we've seen.
Yeah. Especially in a tight margin environment, and also in the knowledge that there's less supply and there's very strong demand, and therefore if you can be out by PC, you can also track the sales market, and therefore if you have an 18-month sales process, if the market goes up, you'll benefit. If the market goes down, you won't. But by locking in 18 months early on a PRS or a build to rent, and then your build cost going up by 10% and your sales value remaining flat because you locked in at a price, then that can cause you headaches.
I mean, I'm just looking at this from a developer's perspective and saying, okay, what are we going to do over a 24-month period? Because we've got a pipeline. We need to get that pipeline sorted out for September 23, September 24, September 25. So where do you go with your use class? You know, talking about the figures we're talking about at the minute, where do you steer your business to get through that sort of the difficulty in the market conditions? How do you pin your, you know, because we're not single use class developers. We'd do anything as long as we can manage the risk on it.
Yeah, but your speciality is in student accommodation. And let's face it, you know, in over the last 10 to 15 years, compared to other property sectors, it's performed very well, both in rental and capital growth terms. So that element of the market and being able to then retain it and manage it like Rengen do is again kind of unique in the SME world. If we focus on SMEs just for a minute, because you mentioned that, you know, they're the lifeblood of our they're the lifeblood of our business. Our book is made up of SME developers around the country, and they are the ones that suffer during the recessions. The numbers have diminished through successive recessions. They don't have the deep pockets of the national house builders, and it's sad to see successive governments and local authorities place even more reliance on the high volume national developers who operate as an oligopoly, and to the detriment of the SME developers.
It's also hard because there's very few new entrants into the market, because development, as you know, is a very long process. So recently we sold the last property at the General, which is 205 apartments in the centre of Bristol for City and Country, and I first priced that scheme 15 years ago, and they bought it 7 years ago.
That's
so
astonishing.
It's a long process, and therefore the cost of capital coming in and buying and having the teams, it's very hard to come into. So as you said, there's more developers leaving the industry than coming in. So it's a challenge, and also fundamentally we need more houses. We need more houses to be built for sale and for rent.
One of the challenging things for us at the moment, yes, and George sort of touched on this a little earlier, is energy efficiency, and you know we touched on EPCs and buyers. Generally sort of go in for properties which are A rated rather than C, D, or E rated.
Very sensible.
Well, a lot of what we do as a well, a lot of what we do as a business, of course, is converting brownfield sites, existing buildings, which we repurpose for other things, and actually trying to get to some of those real energy efficiency targets in an older building is a real challenge at the moment, and.
Especially if it's listed, it's almost impossible, because one of the big requirements is double glazing, which in a listed building is very challenging.
Pete, you're right. I mean, we seem to have picked up quite a few refurbishment projects at the minute rather than new build. So, and Craig sort of touched on again, we tend to keep a lot of our stock and trade it. And what we have seen, obviously, is the management costs have crept up and are creeping up, and we've got to do something to mitigate that. But managing your way through a listed building is not easy as far as energy efficiency is concerned.
Well, it plays into the OPEX, doesn't it? And, reducing the cost of actually operating the buildings, which we finally end up with, because, again...
Hence, you should definitely be selling them through a reputable estate agent.
Absolutely, George. Do you know one?
A good one.
Our model has been traditionally that, I mean, we've had a relationship back, I was trying to think back, since probably 2004, actually. So we probably worked together in one form or another for 20 years. A lot of it has been on open market in the early days, and we perhaps moved our model in 2008 to suit market conditions, actually, because the sales market again then was quite challenging. So we have had that long relationship of selling product. It just so happens we've gone to a more trading type product at the minute. So, ultimately our goal as a developer is selling product and crystallising returns. That's what we have to do. Otherwise we run ourselves out of cash.
Exactly.
So,
So just talking about sort of energy efficiency and environmental and sustainability, it's actually a big topic this year at MIPIM. They have quite a big platform for it. So in terms of sort of development and what's coming down the line with regulations and what we have to build with, and keeping things in the hot topic of sustainability, how does that work as a developer? and how does it affect lending, and what are the costs increased with that, and in terms of sales. So how do we see that?
I mean, look, from a legal perspective, Johnny, you've seen our developments, and there's been increasing requirement for us to sort of incorporate sustainability and those aspects into our developments and into contracts. I mean, you must get quite a lot of bandwidth from what you do on a day-to-day basis.
It's the whole green loan concept, although I'm not sure if it's like completely filtered into all of the actual finance docs yet, but it's definitely top of lenders' agenda that, this ESG compliant. But what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a vague and wide concept, and obviously looking at individual developments on their own, it can't be a collective, industry-wide standard like BREEAM or anything. A lender has to look at it on an individual basis. Craig, I think that's probably.
I think you're right. We'll fund developments depending on whatever EPC rating they think is appropriate to be able to sell. Clearly, in this current environment, there's a lot of greenwashing, as we refer to it, where people are saying that they will potentially change the pricing if developers can achieve an EPC rating of A, for instance. But it's not always easy to achieve an EPC rating of A, and you can get to the stage where you finish a development and maybe it gets a B rating, and then the developer is not happy about that because of whatever criteria they factored into their scheme. But it comes down to money at the end of the day. It's very much it's a cost-driven model. Developers are there to make money and make a margin. They will include various green items if they feel that the demand for their product is going to rise. But in a falling market, it doesn't necessarily translate into additional income for the additional costs that they're putting into it. So it is a bit of a dilemma, albeit the building regulations now, which are changing significantly this year, do include a lot of green measures to be taken into account.
Yeah. And is there pressure to do that, to almost force developers to do that?
I think it's a natural step. I think a new build, as George said before, a new build, you're going to get an A or B anyway, just based on building regulations alone. But it's the move towards more electricity, air source heat pumps, which they're driving at the moment. We're still funding schemes where people are putting gas boilers in, and they're putting gas boilers in because the air source heat pump technology is not tried and trusted as yet.
So they weren't allowed to put gas boilers in after June this year, though, is it?
Well, but it's a technology is on the cusp of change all the time. They're now talking about retrofitting is a huge dilemma for this country at the moment. You're talking about probably over £70 billion. 80 to 85% of all residential households are heating and hot water powered by gas. So now
there is pressure on this because, as we know, from April 25 or whenever the date is,
private landlords.
Well, if at that point you want to rent a property and it doesn't have an EPC rating of C and above, I know the legislation is still going through Parliament at the moment, but it's inevitably coming because of the government's drive to get the net zero. So
Exactly.
The cost of for lots of homeowners
Exactly.
or businesses of achieving that,
Yeah.
you touched on this 70 billion is
Well, it's not so much the homeowner. I think if you're a homeowner, it's your choice whether you insulate or take whatever measures are necessary. But private landlords are, as I understand it, from 2025, they have to achieve an EPC rating of C, otherwise they can't, minimum of C, otherwise they can't let the property, which, going back to your listed buildings and single pane sash windows, etc., it's going to cost a fortune to be able to. So what are they going to do? They're going to put that property back on the market. They're going, and then the rental market will suffer because the supply will come
and
down.
also we're seeing, rental rates are going up at incredible rates, over 10%. which is fine if you're a landlord, but not so fine if you're a tenant, because
Yeah.
the tenant, with all the other cost of living experiences, if their rents go up by 10%, it's really hard to manage that.
Well, supply's going down.
It is hard. Yeah.
Supply's
I
going down.
think we're seeing this at the market now. Actually, the sales market for existing buildings. I mean, we are in the market to buy constantly. We've bought 11 buildings in the last 5 months, I think it is, Pete. And we are seeing opportunities on the basis that existing landlords see what's coming downstream and actually want to sell now, because they don't want to be at a position where they're bumping up against that date. They have a C rating. They prefer to deal with it now and get that, building into the market and offload the problem
Exactly.
to somebody else. Now, you've got to know what you're doing as far as buying that building and buying potentially, an inherent issue downstream. But looking at this with my developer's hat on, if you like, there are some opportunities in the market because of that. And if you're alive to it and you understand what you're doing as far as delivery is concerned, then I think there are some schemes to buy where you can, drive value. But you have to understand exactly what you're doing with that building before you jump into it.
Look, it's certainly sharpened our focus in this regard, because I think just about every one of the development meetings I've sat in recently with the team, the discussion has been about sustainability. How do we, not to be too blunt about it, how do we get some free energy, air source heat pumps, PVs, and how do we make sure that when the final product ends up as a C rating and above? Because if we don't address it now, we're back into the retrofit arena, which you rightly touched on there.
It is, but it's still semantic. I was with a developer yesterday in Yorkshire, and they're building a block of flats, and to achieve the SAP rating sign off, they need to put some PV panels on the roof. I said, well, where the PV panels, they're not going to, who are they going to supply? It's the landlord supply and the electric car chargers in the basement car park. But there's no battery storage, so unless you're charging your car during the day, then, and most people are out of work during that time, then all it's doing is ticking a box at the moment. The move ultimately, if the energy crisis continues, which I'm sure it will be more towards self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency with solar panels. I mean, solar panels should be compulsory on new build, as far as I'm concerned. They should just have, and they should then have an ability to have battery storage within the house, so that whilst they are at work and not using the power, that when they come home, they can then use the power that they've generated.
The positive thing, though, Craig, is that the air source heat pumps will solve the climate crisis, because we'll be just sucking all this increased heat out of the air to use in our air source heat pumps.
I think the jury's still out on that one, Peter, I must admit.
I'm not sure the scientists would agree.
Depends which scientist.
Not everyone has an ability to put up an air source heat pump. With an air source heat pump, you need a hot water cylinder, and small houses just don't have the space in the garden to put one, don't have the space. They're working off combi boilers, which just have direct feed. So it's not a winner takes all. It just doesn't cover everything.
We talked about it earlier, but all the extra conditions on landowners and the development process now than there was 10 years ago.
Astonishing.
Why sales values have gone up massively, but actually land values haven't gone up that much, because there's so many more commitments that guys need to put in. But if you're going to put solar and a battery pack in every house, which does make perfect sense, doesn't it? That would add, I guess, about 10 grand.
Easy, yeah.
And then that means that the buyer's going to find another 10 grand to buy the house. So keep on coming back. Affordability is
The fundamental problem, of course, is we can't produce enough batteries to supply electric cars. If we're not supplying them for houses, we've got an even bigger problem.
And how long do they last? And you can't dispose of them anywhere.
You can't
need to
dispose
dig a
of
big
them,
hole.
yeah, so what do you do?
No, exactly. It's
I mean, retrofit, if you look at that again from a commercial landlord perspective, yes, there's a capex of doing that, obviously, that you've got to go and fit all of this stuff into a building. You've also got the issue of managing your tenants. And going retrofitting something in a room where there is a tenant is not an option. So it's not just the capex; you lose the rental income as well during that period, and that's not an easy process. If you've got a listed building, retrofitting something in a listed building, given the regulations you'd have to go through to achieve that, it's not just the cost of retrofitting; it's the loss of that revenue for the period. And again, in the area where we operate. If you don't move someone in September, You can't move them in November, December. You lose a whole year of rental income on that basis because you can't move them in February, because the student term runs obviously July, September to the following year. So it's the whole year of loss of that rental income
I guess
as well.
just to be controversial, most of the population pollution. It comes from housing. I could tell you the stat if I knew it, but it's the majority of pollution comes from housing, and therefore the government need to be legislating to improve conditions. It's a problematic for the landlord, but it'll be better for the tenant because they'll have lower utility bills because the house is going to be more efficient. So, like all these things, it has a yin and a yang, doesn't it? One maybe everything has a reaction.
So most of your schemes, though, you just put electric in, don't you?
Yeah, we do now. I mean, there's the operational position of gas in a building with, tenant students, and we try and move away from that in any case, just because of the obvious issues with gas and the maintenance of that product. So we have tended, we originally did it sort of probably 15 years ago. We have pretty much moved away from gas full stop in all of our buildings, actually.
Yeah.
Well, there is a bit of a mix across the portfolio at the moment because in some of the schemes which we picked up recently, we have a statutory requirement to connect to the district heating system where there's a district heating system available. But they're so far behind the curve in delivering those to the areas they need to be delivered. It's difficult.
Yeah, but
we are.
Combined heat and power systems in blocks of flats now is pretty standard. So if they had, I suppose, a network of air source heat pumps, which then powered that system, it wouldn't make any difference to whether they got gas or not. I think it's a huge dilemma, and I think whenever I see a development and they are putting gas in, there's always a reason, and it comes down to money. One of my clients was going to go all electric for a block of 20 flats, but the UKPN, the power networks, insisted on them building a new substation within the site, which would have cost 50 grand.
Yeah.
He just put gas in. It killed the viability of the project. Yeah. So as coming back to the green subject, it comes down to pound shillings and pence.
It does look it's a challenging, no doubt about it. The current conditions, when you're taking interest rates and inflation into account and everything else we've had to deal with over the last couple of years, the build process is very challenging, as we said earlier, to try and get a scheme to stack up, try and get it to fit within the appraisal parameters of what you can spend on that particular component to get it built within a specific period. It's becoming increasingly difficult. When you overlay that, as you mentioned, George, and Jonny will know, all the paperwork requirements on a developer nowadays is quite astonishing. We just have an army of people. I mean, we have consultants sit alongside us. But I don't actually know how you would run a development business at the minute if you didn't have numerous hands to fill out paperwork. It is a constant process, and not just tick box exercise, but Pete knows this all too well. The legal side of it is quite astonishing. So overlaying paperwork, legislation, current codes of practice with that tightening the build product, if you like, an increase of build costs, is a real challenge as a developer.
Okay, so let's talk about MIPIM to finish off this chat. We are going down in a couple weeks, and it is, the largest, forum for development projects and sources of capital for people to access. So talk to me about what you guys as Rengen are hoping to get out of it, and you, Jonny, what do you go to MIPIM for, and same for you guys.
Well, I'll talk about the first time I went, actually. So It's probably 20 years ago when I met George, probably, 2004. So I thought it'd be a good idea. I had an Audi at the time, RS Audi, and I thought what I'll do is I'll drive to MIPIM. So I caught the ferry, Portsmouth Le Havre, and in those days, no sat-nav or anything. You had the big A to Z to the maps. So I'd gone to the map and worked my route out. But I sort of had slightly underestimated how big France is, because I thought, well, I'll do it in a day. And I arranged a meeting at the end of that day in Cannes. And I thought, plenty of time, I'll stop for a bit of lunch and some cheese and on the way down. So I got off the ferry at Le Havre, started driving. 19 hours later, in my car. Rather fatigued, I think I rolled into Cannes. So I won't be doing that this year. Rather bad memories of that first trip down there and me thinking that France was slightly smaller than it actually is.
Better than Matt Jones.
Yeah, I was
last
sure,
time.
I thought you were going to emulate Matt and cycle down there. I think Matt's going to do it on a unicycle this year.
Yeah, we're in this clown outfit, no doubt. But
I think MIPIM is like the ultimate property networking event, without a doubt. There were so many different people there, and people from all walks of property. And the beauty of it, obviously, is the setting by the sea, the weather, which is usually good, apart from one of our meetings we'll come on to. But the weather is usually good. There's lots of professional practices which host events to promote themselves, but ultimately to encourage socialising, etc. So I think that as an event, it's extremely interesting. Whether you win business or not, it's an important place to be, and it's amazing the different walks of life in property, the people that you meet there and discuss with. I think it's very conducive to establishing relationships, which, going back to my point earlier, is what our business really thrives on.
Yeah, I
That
think
would
in
be
the,
my point about relationships, that there's probably 100 people who I want to see when I'm down there. I might meet some more people, but I'm largely interested in looking after the people that I know, and people are much more open and have more time there, they're more relaxed, and you can also link them into other people who are down there. So it's just
it's that LinkedIn thing, linking up with new people and old contacts is, I think that's the best thing at MIPIM, is that you can bump into George, who will then introduce you to someone you've never met, and then you can grow a relationship from there. I think working in property, people like to instruct people they like, so the relationships are fundamental in the industry. So and I don't think I think MIPIM's
It's a concentration of people in a small, what is less than a square mile, isn't it? Really, you bump into people, you can organise meetings. It's just a very conducive atmosphere.
As my CEO at Savills says, there's plenty of people who are likeable, and there's plenty of people who are trustable. But if you have someone that's likeable and you trust, then that's where the sort of magic happens. And I think MIPIM helps both of those bits.
I think this year for Rengen at MIPIM, it's important because we're actually launching a new brand, Carve Developments, which is a new joint venture we've set up, which has already acquired 5 assets, I think, or is in the process of acquiring 5 assets. So, for us this year in MIPIM, launching that and sort of getting it into the marketplace with, the people who we already know and the people we'll meet when we're there, is going to be pretty defining.
It's a captive audience.
Yes, exactly.
You know that people are going to turn up to your event. If you launch it in London or the Southwest or anything else, they might turn up, might not, depending on what's going on in their lives. You know what's going on in their lives down in MIPIM because they're down there to do exactly this sort of thing. So it's an ideal opportunity for us to get a brand into the market, because you are going to get the people you want to come to that event to come to the event. Hopefully, and I'm sure they will. But it's an ideal opportunity for us to go and do that.
Get it done before 9 o'clock.
We're debating the sort of time during the day to actually launch. You've got to be quite careful, as you know, down in MIPIM. So we did put a fair bit of thought into what time of the day do we do that launch, actually.
We were saying good weather, but I remember we remember sitting in a bar, absolutely hacking it down. There was thunder and lightning, and that was with Scott.
It was Scott Harvey, actually. That's right. It's amazing the speed at which the sort of street sellers went from sort of sunglasses to umbrellas, so within sort of 20 minutes, actually.
It was, but that was that. Talk about a captive audience. That was literally, you couldn't get out there, because until we sat down for a few hours and had a good chat and drink. So it was.
It's a strange thing, MIPIM, isn't it? Because for businesses like us, it's part of our marketing spend, and you never actually know how effective that marketing spend is going to be. Sometimes it's difficult to measure it. I think, from our perspective, though, we are actually able to measure historically, what the spend has been worth, because on the back of it, as we touched on earlier, we sold a portfolio down there, which, at one of George's lunch, in fairness, so big thank you to George. So,
Not sure I haven't put my fee in for that either.
I know I shouldn't have mentioned it.
Send it to Jonny, George. I'm sure John will assess that for us.
I'm sure that would pay for a few MIPIMs looking ahead.
I mean, how do you... I look back, I've been going for, years now, on and off, if you like, not consistently every year, probably same as you, Craig, but I've been on and off for that length of time. Has it changed? As the sort of personnel down there, if you like, the attendees, are just trying to think. I think it's become, from my end, more senior people tend to go now. I think a few years back, I think it was less...
Pre-COVID,
specific, but I think chatting to people who are going down this year, it does seem to be more senior type people within the organisations which are going rather than a broad spread. So, we've obviously linked up with numerous people going down and got meetings in. But that's the one thing I would say. I think the type of people going tends to be more senior, director type level, rather than the sort of, broad spread that we have seen over the years. And I've certainly seen that over that period.
I think it kind of ebbs and flows with the boom in the market as well, and the actual conditions. Clearly, leading up to 2008, there was a lot of people there. In 2009, probably half the number of people that were there, and the same over the last few years. I mean, with COVID, it was non-existent. It was MIPIM. Well, they were trying to do things over Zoom, and done really work that well. But last year was a night. It was a good number of people out there last year. There were a few late bookings, and there was a lot of the cafes and bars weren't open, so it restricted the number of places you could go to, and there was a lot of roadworks going on, which I'm sure will be finished by now for this year's event.
It is France.
But it was still very enjoyable. I expect there'll be a lot more people this year than there were last year.
I mean, when's the last time we went, Pete? It's
I was going to say, we didn't go last year. We decided to put the marketing spend on one of the runners in the Gold Cup, I think. But yeah, it was probably... Last time we went, it would have been pre-COVID, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So that would have been 2019.
Yeah, I think.
And that's probably a good example, as I said. We took a lot more people down there.
Yeah, we did.
The last time we went. I mean, it's a smaller team going this time, I suppose.
Yeah, but it is the senior team this time.
Yeah,
so,
it is actually.
I think it's important to book in, see the people that you want to see, that you have fixed meetings, whether they're lunches, dinners, whatever, but make sure you get involved in the networking events, because they're the ones where, like Jonny said, George can introduce you to someone else, who then introduce you to another person, and that's the essence of MIPIM.
You have to remember though, Craig, there's only one difference between networking and not working. However, I've also managed to agree some instructions and relationships that have then gone on to put cash in the till. So for me, it's a winner, and a couple of grand's worth of cost, but actually, you don't need to win many jobs.
Exactly.
No.
To justify it.
I mean, you've got to have that structure to go down with. It's your framework to work around. You always get pulled into different events. I mean, we have been down with no structure at all, which doesn't work particularly well. If you try and freestyle your way through the days, you can do it. I don't think you get maximum delivery out of that. So we've got far more of a structure this year to work around, I would say. But you do need to leave slots in there, because as you say, you never know where you're going to end up and which meeting you're going to get bounced into, actually. It's always that sort of art of the unknown down in MIPIM, really.
But that's part of the joy of being down there and the benefit, isn't it? Is, dealing with some of those unknown things.
It's a lovely place as well.
Yeah.
I like getting up early in the morning and running along the coast with the trains by my side. And
But funny enough,
that's a good way of clearing the air for the next.
We've never really done that, funny enough.
I've never seen you down there, but there are lots of people that do it. Depends how early we go.
Nice. Well, I think that's it for this. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Super.
It's been a pleasure to have you. And we'll look forward to seeing this go live and to the next few episodes.
Indeed.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you for coming.